Good afternoon. As presented, I'm Suraj. It's a pleasure to be here today. First of all, congratulations to BusinessWorld on hosting such an amazing conference and such interesting speakers so far. I'm clearly the Indian amongst all the chiefs here. And I've been asked to present a little bit of McKinsey's view on what it'll take to sustain and accelerate this growth in the Philippines, this fabulous growth that we've seen. And Commissioner Balisakan has shown a version of this chart just showing the fabulous growth the Philippines has had since, let's say, the year 2000. I think what is more interesting about this growth is also that over the years, volatility has come down. The volatility of growth has come down. And we're seeing clearly a lot of hard factors like youth, English-speaking skills, and so on and so forth. And soft factors like economic freedom come into play. That's kind of clearly showing the Philippines to be a strong market. Now, having said that, we at McKinsey believe the world is a more volatile place than ever before. We're seeing technology start to break into industries like banking, telecoms, energy. We're seeing old institutions, as old as the Catholic Church, start to pull themselves apart and reinvent themselves for the world that we're about to see. And we're seeing the average life of companies come down from maybe 90 years to about 20 years on the S&P 500. So the world is becoming a more difficult place to navigate, which gives us a lot of opportunities as well as threats. And today I'll try and focus a little bit on the opportunities. We believe there are 6 opportunities specifically, and what I'll do is, rather than going through them now in the interest of time, let me run through them one by one. So the first opportunity is really for the Philippines to own some sectors. Now, this is the typical consultant slide. It's made for you to think I'm saying more than I'm saying, to pretend I know more than I know, and to confuse you. I hope you like it. What you see here is, let's take manufacturing as an example. This chart basically breaks down manufacturing FDI across a bunch of sub-industries. So you've got chemicals, motor vehicles, and so on and so forth, and countries. And what it shows is which country got FDI in which particular sector over a 5-year period. The dark blue, the darkest blue, indicates that that particular sector was more than 20% of the FDI in that particular country. And the light blue indicates it was reasonably insignificant in the overall scheme of things. So that's the color gradation. And what you see here may be a couple of things. Number one, the Philippines is the only country amongst the large 5 ASEAN countries to not have a dark blue. So if you go to Thailand, you see automotive is about 40% of their FDI. Or you go to Malaysia, you find that electrical machinery is about 20 to 40% based on how you cut it. The Philippines does not have a dark blue, and there's an opportunity here for us to have a dark blue. Because if you look at the next dark blue, we have more kind of medium dark blues than any other country in the region. So there is an opportunity for us here to say, do we want to pick a couple of these sectors, subsectors, and be known for manufacturing in the region? We personally believe, for example, that if you look at the size of some of Manila's markets, or the size of the market the Philippines will present by 2030, we have a strong cause to be a base for consumer product marketing. So for example, Manila will be the 2nd largest market for baby diapers by 2030 in ASEAN. We should be manufacturing more diapers than anybody else in the region. And if you take that consumer view and a consumer base, which frankly is far more willing to experiment than most Asia-Pacific markets, there's no reason why we could not develop consumer champions, as we are. We are seeing a lot of that starting to happen. But this also means that were we to pick this as a country, we need to think a lot harder about supply chains, about logistics, about creating manufacturing centers of excellence, and about creating knowledge bases. Today, we have a lot of our companies going abroad, trying to conquer the regional consumer space, and yet you find a lot of them actually manufacturing outside rather than inside because of the cost of manufacturing. Transportation adds several percentage points more to the cost of food in our country than it does in, let's say, a Malaysia or a Thailand. So that's theme number one. And we believe, you take agro-foods, for instance. Agro-food exports has been growing at about 16-17% for the last 3 years in the Philippines. The historic rate of growth has been more like 7%, 8%. If we can actually sustain that rate of growth for the next 15 years, that itself could be $11 billion of exports on top of our GDP. So these sectors could start becoming quite significant to us as we double down on them. So that's priority number one. Can we own some sectors and be known for some sectors in a way that we're not today? Priority number two, we would say, is agriculture. This is one more of those difficult charts. You're seeing a theme here. I like throwing them at you. But this chart basically shows agricultural yield on a bunch of commodities from, let's say, cassava, coconuts, maize, mangoes. And it basically ranks countries in terms of the highest yield per hectare in terms of tons to the lowest yield per hectare. And the little dark blue is the Philippines there. And you see across countries, across crops, we tend to have a half to a quarter of the productivity per hectare that other countries tend to have. We also have the oldest farmers. I'm sure that's, we're 57 versus 45 for Thailand. We have the lowest mechanization, 116 tractors per hectare versus, let's say, a 280 for Indonesia or a Thailand. Right? So clearly, there's room to take this up. And what we do see in our experience working with other countries is it's possible to increase productivity, increase agricultural output quite quickly by doing a few very basic things. You take Morocco. In 4 years, they had agri outputs up by 43%. And this was done through a mix of factors. Number one was teaching farmers, even small-scale farmers, but teaching them how to right crop, how to switch to crops where Morocco just had an advantage. So Morocco today is one of the leading producers of olives and citrus fruits, was not so many years ago. So they changed the crop mix. They got investments into the sector. They got about, if I remember the number correctly, about almost $1 billion into the industry to build the right infrastructure. And over 5 years, they almost doubled investments, right? And so that's Morocco. In Mexico, you see similar numbers, and $1.5 billion going into investments. The government reducing yield differences. In the Philippines, when we look at the potential to increase yields, both in terms of number of trees per hectare, output per tree, but also in terms of what kinds of crops we plant. We've done some analysis in later, for instance, which shows that in some places, shifting from coconuts to, let's say, groundnuts or bananas could increase revenue per hectare by a factor of 2 to 4, based on how you cut the numbers. So there are some relatively simple things we could do to drive agricultural growth, and that will then create rural demand for consumption and so on and so forth. The third theme I'd like to put out there is what I call BPO Reimagine. Now, it's no secret that the Philippines has been blessed with an amazing BPO industry, frankly built on the back of workers who just are very, very service-oriented and are able to deliver service in ways other countries cannot. This is a market which is growing at 25% per annum still. And we at McKinsey feel extremely privileged to have been part of the original roadmap. We have other sectors where we have skills that are just waiting to be tapped in similar ways. So the Philippines, 1 in 5 seafarers in the world comes from the Philippines. We have the highest density of healthcare workers in the region, and frankly amongst all of our peers. And yet we see some of the other countries tend to grow much faster than us in some of these areas. We believe, for example, that if we could grow medical tourism at the same rate that Thailand is growing medical tourism at, this could add a couple of $1 billion onto export in 15 years. Our medical services are about 80% cheaper than the US and other advanced countries, and yet we don't really have the infrastructure to build this industry. We have only 3 JCI accredited hospitals in the country versus 18 in Thailand. So this is opportunity number 3, which is, can we build sectors like health tourism, like ship management into significant next BPO opportunities. Opportunity number 4, we believe, is external orientation. The Philippines has the smallest number of locally headquartered global corporations in the region. Now, this is something which is rapidly changing as many of our businesses go out, but we believe that external orientation and having global local corporations is fundamental to driving innovation and driving sustained growth. And we do think that ASEAN and the AEC is just one opportunity to do that. And what you see here is a McKinsey Global Institute chart which says to what extent are various industries progress in integration. And I apologize, the y-axis you can't see, but it is to what extent will these industries So this is to what extent will they progress, and that's to what extent will they benefit. And you see areas where we could be strong, healthcare, financial services, agro-based, will actually be transformed quite dramatically by the AEC over time. So can we use this to develop local giants? Oops, something's playing back here. So that's opportunity number 4. Number 5 is around infrastructure. Can everyone still hear me? Okay. Number 5 is around infrastructure. By 2030, the economy of Manila will be the size of the economy of Malaysia today. Now, you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a thing. It's a thing, and we find cities grow, cities are organic, cities die very, very slowly. Look at Rome, 3,000 years later, hale and hearty. It will be big. It will be big, and we will have a population with upper middle class expectations. We will have an economy which probably requires about $22 billion of infrastructure a year for the next 15 years. And we'll need to figure out how to get more out of the existing infrastructure. One of the programs we've been running in Moscow for the last 4 years has been called Giving Back a Week a Year to Citizens by having them spend less time in traffic. And this is through doing simple stuff like using existing infrastructure better, ensure the roads are not clogged. So just doing that is going to be important. Better use of infrastructure and better planning, not just in Manila, but our estimate is after Manila, it'll be the smaller cities which grow the fastest. In fact, almost at the pace of Manila. And these are cities today which probably have less than 500,000 people population. These are cities which are going to need forward planning at a pace that that will require huge amounts of investment going in. And this then talks to the kinds of bonds we'll have to raise, the kinds of financing we will need. The final point I'd like to raise, point number 6, is around people development, which is, if you look at where, this is a bit of a complicated chart, but I think an important chart. It just shows, it breaks down GDP growth into 3 components. So the dark blue on this chart is, to what extent was GDP growth over the last few years driven by more people in the economy? The medium blue is, to what extent was GDP growth driven by people switching from low productive sectors to high productivity sectors? And the light blue is, to what extent was GDP growth driven by intra-sector productivity? So people within a sector getting better at what they do. And what you find on this chart is, compared to the other large ASEAN countries, our growth by far has been explained by more people coming into the labor force. And we've had the least contribution, apart from Indonesia, of intra-sector productivity improvements. Now, this is not a good thing. It's not a good thing because if we don't increase the productivity of people in the labor force, by definition, we can't pay them more. By definition, they're underemployed. By definition, wealth doesn't trickle down. And so we do think that raising intra-sector productivity for businesses, taking advantage of technology, taking advantage of training, is going to become really important. And one of the ways we think of doing that, one of the most important ways we see emerging around the world, is actually through better vocational training. We find that countries, you take countries like the Czech Republic, Denmark, Germany, where they have between 30 and 50% youth enrollment in vocational trainings, is actually where we're seeing the lowest amount of youth unemployment. So again, the y-axis is a bit chopped off on this, that should be youth unemployment. McKinsey ourselves have launched a program called Generations, where we're aiming to create 1 million jobs by training 1 million youth around the world over the next 3-4 years through vocational training. We have the unfortunate reality in Asia of parents advising children to go do a bachelor's degree or then do a master's degree. But then we do have the irony of a lot of people coming out of our universities, and yet 16 to 20% availabilities that are not being filled in areas like accounting, areas like sales, and so on and so forth. So just better fit education for purpose. So those are the 6 themes I want to leave us with. Again, with much humility, given the rest of the panel here, I'm sure I've made a few mistakes, but thank you for the time.